Daniel Linhart, how are you doing? How's another day in paradise?
I am doing great. I moved my office over the weekend,
Yep.
and I'm in a different room. I am no longer in a playroom. That was also a makeshift office, so I feel a little bit better. Got everything moved up. Still need to do some decorating, but I'm feeling much more productive. And I have a window that I can look out and see the
Natural
outside.
light.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Yeah. I moved my
How about
desk.
you?
That's about
How
it.
are you?
Yeah, things are good. No complaints. No
All right.
complaints. Just moving to another day. Hey, we have a guest today. I'm really excited. We got a chance to talk last week, and he agreed to jump on a podcast with us. And I am super honored to have him because I've read many of his books and watched his videos, and I love everything that most of what he says. I mean, we'll figure out, throughout the conversation. I want to welcome Richard Banfield. Thank you so much for joining us today, Richard.
And thank you for inviting me. Really appreciate it. Yeah. And thanks for reading the books. I think you and my mom and a couple other people.
I'm sure they've got a much further reach than that.
Yeah. Although it is funny, every time we put out a YouTube video, my mom did have to come out and say, like, should I stop being the first comment on every video? I was like, yeah, Mom, you should.
Yeah.
I love the love, but it's a different purpose maybe. Well, thank you so much for jumping on. I want maybe to give you a chance to tell a little bit about who you are and kind of what you're about. I know you've kind of moved into a role at Envision, and I would love to hear your story a little bit. So maybe giving you a space to tell your story about how you got to where you are now. And what's something, as we talk about here a lot at Option 5, we're about small cross-discipline teams, right, that are helping individuals and organizations thrive through design, technology, and culture, right? That's kind of our mission. Option 5, just so you know, Option 5 itself, the term Option 5 actually comes through this idea. We had a proposal that we were going after years ago, like 8 years ago. We really weren't sure we were qualified to get it. But so we came up with all these like 4 brilliant ways that we get it. We'd have partners, we'd hire people and all this stuff. And then I think it was Dan, you said, or we could just Option 5 it, which basically means
say yes and figure it out.
We're gonna figure it out, right? You get creative and you step into the unknown and you take a risk. And I think it's those small iterative risks, so challenges that push us forward. So that's what Option 5 is about. So maybe your Option 5 story will come through.
I like that. I might use it.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, it's always awkward talking about yourself, but I think one of the themes throughout my life is just this natural curiosity of what's going on around me. I don't have a very typical career path where, you went to school for something and you then did this thing that led to this other thing, and it was very specifically around a career path or an industry that you wanted to be in. Mine's a bit of a dog's breakfast, and really, if you kind of peel back the layers, you just see a guy that doesn't have a lot of particular direction, but I have a lot of curiosity. So it's mostly like finding my way through life.
I love it. I love it.
Yes to a bunch of stuff. In fact, my favorite movie is Yes Man, because he's just like going to do a whole bunch of yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, has to say yes. Yep.
If you haven't seen it, it's Jim Carrey, and he's he has to say yes. He gets into an agreement with a friend where he has to say yes to everything that happens, and it's just hilarious. And I actually did that once. Agreed with a friend to say yes to everything for a year. And it was one of the funnest times of my life.
Really?
Yeah. And it's not advisable because you tend to get this, this bandwidth issue where you just run out of time to do it.
Right.
But you say yes to a lot of really cool things as well. So you end up going to interesting places and hanging out with interesting people. And there may have been some psychedelics involved as well. But
I mean, that's to be assumed. If you're saying yes, I mean, you have to say yes, right? I get it.
Right. It had to be one of the most dangerous of your years as well. It had to be.
But eventually all roads lead to product. If you're a curious person and you're living in the 21st century, a lot of the things that we touch are technology, and where that interface between technology and humans comes into play really means product. I mean, that's kind of another way of saying it, is like you're interfacing between an imagination of the human experience and how that's maybe experienced by others, and where the technology makes that proxy happen. So I'm going way back. I'm a biologist, so I really love the idea of applying systems and biological thinking to the work that I do. Asking a lot of questions around like, why is this happening? Would this happen if technology wasn't around, or if this technology was a little bit more primitive, or, you know, what would happen if humans weren't around? Would the same kind of experience be going on? And you get some pretty cool answers. You know, nature has found a way to answer a lot of the big questions. So if you step away from the technology and you just think about it from the point of view of what's the problem that nature's trying to solve here, you get some really interesting, I guess, paths to follow.
Fascinating.
And that may not be always the best answer, but it's the way to go.
Yeah. We've had so many different people with different backgrounds that ended up in product. I think there's been journalists. Actually, journalists is really interesting because they're really good at asking hard questions, or the questions that no one else would think about. Definitely different people from science backgrounds, especially if it went towards the computer science. Biology, I don't think you're a first biologist.
Well, I mean, science, you know, it's kind of like the scientific method is really what you're thinking about as you approach any problem. And product is a lot about problem solving, right? Of course, you're presented with questions and you're trying to find answers, and scientists were the first ones to really put that into a methodology. The scientific method is really a big question, a hypothesis, and then looking for ways to test or experiment your way through to an answer, or a hypothesis on, you know, a null hypothesis in some cases, but still trying to get a pattern out of that and recognize where the themes might be. And that's why things like design sprints are really just relabeled. That same, if you look at that process, you look at the scientific method and you look at a design sprint, it's really just the same thing, except that it's got a bunch of cool little labels on.
Go ahead, Dan.
I was gonna say, Richard, we're gonna get into this, your book, Product Leadership, and a lot of the blogs I've read and videos I've watched, there's this passion of where product and leadership meets teams. You said all paths lead to product. So I'm kind of curious, when you, in your expertise around product teams and leadership, did a successful team lead you to product, or did you go down the path of product and then you started to see how teams can work well together? Was it both at the same time, or was there one before the other? I'm curious.
Yeah, good question. The answer is that I see that the team is the product.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
The metaphor there, maybe not quite as practical.
Unpack that. Yeah.
But if you think about it, the grand design, the best design that you can come up with is the team. So if you can touch that, then all the work that comes out of that is going to be better. So instead of starting with the tech or starting with what the product use might be, start with, is this the right team? Do we have the right leadership? Are we basing our work in the right set of values and principles? And let that become the foundation for the work. Because if you look at teams that, or founders even, that generally are successful in some serial manner, they work with the same people over and over again. A friend of mine, Dave Cancel, who runs Drift here in Boston, he's pretty much worked with the same collection of people in some form or the other over the course of a decade or two. And, you know, it's not always exactly the same people, but they tend to find their way back, and it's the same kind of people. People very high EQ, very high understanding of what it means to work with others, what it means to solve problems with people versus the lonely genius in a room, right? The Goodwill Hunting thing, not so much, right? It's too much independence, too much the lone genius idea. And the successful people tend to build products, teams, and then product on top of that. You see them working very closely with other folks. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's
great.
That's the intersection, is that I when I was studying biology, I was trying to figure out what living things did to be more successful than other living things, you know, in the Darwinian form, like what's more fit than the other thing.
Right.
And in the human context, I was always like, well, why do these people or these leaders do better than others? And initially I was really, really interested in folks that did extreme things, like explorers, like how did they do better and survive those ridiculous situations that they put themselves in? And why was that? Why did, like, for instance, there were certain people who would continuously go and be successful at exploring or mountain climbing, and others that would die. I mean, that's a pretty extreme product team environment. But I was like, why? And so if you work backwards from the extreme versions and take it to a much more docile experience, the kind of work that we do, you can apply those things. And so I like going out to the fringes and seeing what extreme teams are doing, looking at Red Bull extreme sport teams, and those, just the individuals that work on those teams, the teams that create those teams. So there are high functioning teams that produce those teams. Formula One, military teams, like, why do they work well and successfully? And could we learn something from that? Is there something there? Is it applied in some way? And I don't mean just like use all the sports terminology or military terminology in your conversations, because that's kind of, I don't know, in a way that's jargon. It doesn't really.
Right.
But if you can learn why they do so well, then you can apply it. And so hopefully I've done that.
Have you found there are consistent, not universal, but maybe consistent themes or principles that you've seen across each of those teams? I'm feeding it a little bit, but
everybody asks this question, right? This is like the number one question I get is like, I haven't read your book yet, but can you tell me what the themes are?
Yeah, I have read the book, so I'm kind of
So it's funny because there are definitely things that are not common, right? They're where you grew up, how you were educated, the culture that you're from. Those things don't really stand out specifically. Now that's independent of privilege, right? So there's definitely privilege plays a part. And if you were a white guy, you've got a great education, you're more likely to end up with that high-paying product job than if you were a black woman, say from Ghana.
Right.
Those things are the thing. But if you were to somehow create a level playing field, then those kinds of differences don't seem to make as much of a difference to the work being done and the ability for people to work together. What does really make a difference is this idea of being, Carol Dweck talks about open mindset versus closed mindset. The people that wrote the 5 conscious leadership choices or commitments, I think it's called, the 15 conscious leaders, something along those lines. They write about the above the line and below the line. And so lots of people have written about this in different ways, but the core principle there is, are you in an open learning mindset or are you in the mindset where you have to be right?
Right.
And that is the critical difference. That's like the thing that makes that's the characteristic you see in teams that are successful is, are we a learning organism? Are we a learning organization? Are we a learning team? Or are we status managing to be right?
It's interesting you say that, because Carol Dweck is actually mentioned in Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. She has a great TED Talk. And she mentioned as a culture, we are obsessed with this idea of natural talent, which, there is natural talent, but we almost attribute any success story to, man, they are just talented. I mean, they can just naturally do that. There might be some reason, for that. There might be some that's actually true about that. But what she is finding is that those that have that mindset typically have a fixed mindset. I have to put everything on my talent. And so when you talk about that and bringing together teams, it's almost like you have to focus on a balance between those that do have a natural talent, but also those that have a growth mindset and may not be as talented, but they'll outwork you any day of the week, to get better, and they're curious and they're willing to learn. So that's interesting you say that, because it's fresh in my mind as well, is that you want individuals that are just, I don't care how hard I fall, I'm going to get back up and keep learning and get better. And there's just success story after success story where a lot of the people that we might look up to have a very much a growth mindset versus focused on their talent.
And I think that we probably, as leaders and as organizations, we often make the mistake of hiring for skill, right? So for
Yeah.
talent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas what we should be doing is hiring for character.
Mm-hmm.
Can the person learn? Can they apply that learning? Can they work with others to help others through that process as well? So are they coachable and also good coaches? There's got to be that intake. And that's so hard to figure out when you're hiring. So very often it fails at that point.
Mm-hmm.
What we did at my previous company was created an apprentice program.
Yep.
So we would take a big intake. So there would maybe be 150 people applying for that semester or cohort. And of that 150, we would do our best to get it down to a number that was reasonable. Say it's like, 30 or so. And then we'd invite those people to spend a weekend with us. We put them through a hackathon, but it's a way for us not to judge their skill sets or their ability to push pixels, write code or anything like that, but rather how do they work with others? How do they show up as human beings? And very often we'd give them tests to do that were tricks. I mean, we were just tricking them into seeing how they would behave. Like,
Right. Yeah.
Either would absolutely fail. Like, how would they respond to that failure? Would they learn from that? Would they be disgusted in themselves and walk out of the room? And then from that, we would take the folks that rose to the top in terms of character, and we would put them into a skills training program. And that skills training program was a combination of coursework and mentored work that was customer facing. So the idea there is practice, but practice in a context that actually allows you to learn, knowing well that there are going to be risks for everybody involved. So our customers knew that we would be putting those clients, in this case, we would be putting those people, those apprentices on those projects, accompanying some of the senior people, and that there was going to be, a price or a value associated with that.
Yeah.
But everybody would be learning on the job. But the client would assume some part of that risk, and we would assume the majority of that risk. And we would go into that relationship knowing that context was the chief learning constraints for those people. And then coming out of that, we would be able to say, wow, we worked with you for 3 months. You definitely have both the initial and the long-term character that fits in with our culture. And then we could offer them a full-time job. Or maybe it didn't fit out and like, hey, this is not a great fit. We love you anyway. You got a great apprentice. We paid you because it was an internship. And because you worked at a premium firm, working on some amazing stuff, your portfolio now looks great, and you essentially escalated your opportunity into the market. And the focus there, of course, was to take in anybody that we thought needed a little extra help. So all of its privileged things that we experience as white guys, we would focus in on, let's make sure that not only white guys get in on this, like
Totally.
who else support on that journey, and focus on diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very, I love that because it's very similar. I do like your weekend hackathon. That's an idea I might steal because I think that's a really neat way to vet down to your kind of core apprentices. We also have an apprenticeship program, almost verbatim. We do it 6 months because our internships are 3 months, and we have a 6-month apprenticeship. We've hired most of those apprentices, and same focus on diversity. And honestly, it was one of the greatest ways for us to expand specifically our women in tech space, which it was just super cool. And we've got some of our best teams are predominantly women developers and things like that. So that's just a really neat place to be. So I love that mindset. And something you said earlier, where it's about the people that are coachable. And I know Dan talks a lot about this. If we even have an inkling that someone's not coachable, most of the time we'll walk away. It is a deal breaker for us. You can learn, React, you can learn Figma or InVision or, Sketch or whatever it is that you're going to need to use that day. But if you're not coachable, you won't actually be willing to learn. We refer to that sometimes as humble confidence. So for us, there's, you need to be humble enough to learn, but confident enough that you can get better. Because there's oftentimes that self-deprecating humility, which actually is almost just as bad as the I'm not willing to change and I'm not willing to be
Yeah.
coached. I'm self-deprecating to the point where I can't do that.
That was actually one of our values.
Oh yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
maybe I stole that from you. Maybe I stole.
the more the merrier.
Yeah.
We open sourced our apprentice program because it was so successful.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Hopefully, I think it's one of those areas that's undervalued in the US.
I agree.
Without question.
Apprentices are very, very much part of the culture there and valued. Very, they're not valued. People confuse apprenticeships with internships, and it's not the same thing. Like really learning on the job and getting the confidence you need to be able to do the work you need to do.
Yeah, just one quick case of that. My brother-in-law is, he's very good with machines. And so, I mean, the size of the machines he works on are about the size of a football field. I mean, they're making that size, it's that level of tooling to make these machines. And his apprenticeship is 2 years long. And to be apprenticed under these master technicians. And it's a great gig. He gets to travel around to different cities because the company he's with is global. But when he said apprenticeship, I was thinking, 6 months. He goes, no, 2 years. I'm like, that's awesome. 2 years of learning and becoming a master. So I love that he's doing it. It fits his mindset. He's a learner, loves working with his hands on machines. And it was just like, that's awesome. Yeah.
In some ways, I'm jealous of that. We learned by starting a company instead of, getting like,
it's the other way.
Yeah. It was complete ignorance to go like, well, why couldn't we?
That was our first option 5 months.
Yeah, totally. So let me ask you a question. How much, I think that there's this adage of like the rate of change is continuing to increase, right? So there is so much that's changing. You are seeing more and more companies move to a product mindset or maybe a design thinking mindset or whatever term you want to put around that. What are other things that you see changing in the product design development world, kind of right in front of us? Where do you think things are moving?
Well, the right answer is
it's a big question.
Yeah, it depends on the context, right? So it depends on the size of the organization, what level of maturity they're at in terms of their industry, the particulars of that organization, where they might be in their own cycle. So early stage companies need to behave in a certain way to achieve certain things, and those things are not going to be appropriate as they get bigger. So there aren't there's certainly not like universal things that are going to work for everybody, but you do see the environmental change that's happening right now, especially around the COVID pandemic, is forcing companies to collaborate in ways that they haven't had to. So that's the big story, right? Transformation to that end goal where you can all work in any environment, from home, from coffee shop, whatever you choose ultimately. That was going to happen, but it was probably going to take 10 years. Now it's happened in 3 months, and it's going to continue to happen. And I think the last thing I saw was that 70% of people who currently work from home as a result of COVID do not intend on going back.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's a huge, massive shift.
Yeah. So I think that means a lot for every part of the product development and creation process, because not only are we expected to work as a team and try and work cross-functionally in some way that ultimately produces a product or some kind of outcome, but we also have to work with our customers. We have to work with our clients in your case, and their customers. And it means having the context that's required for that empathy in order to be a successful product person. So, how do you do user testing? How do you do field testing? How do you do service design? Those are all really big questions that are not clearly answered right now. There are some point solutions to that, but I think we don't have a universal answer to where that's headed, and still some time needs to pass before we know exactly what's going to happen there. So that's really critical. And then working with partners. So partners could be your clients, but they could be the other vendors in the process who provide you with services. Or I don't know about you guys, but when we were running Fresh Soil, I don't think we ever did a product project where we didn't work with somebody else. It might have been a branding agency or PR company or offshore engineering firm. Like there was somebody involved in doing something, and we were working with them. And And so or even multiple parties within the same organization. I remember doing this project for FedEx, and I think we did 9 different projects for 4 different divisions of FedEx, and none of them had ever talked to each other. They didn't.
Right, of course.
There's
Such
no
a
like,
common story.
yeah, there's no like knowledge transfer or
Right.
momentum or the flywheel that's created by working with those people, because there's such a lot of siloed work going on. And so I think we're starting to see that break down, but we're also starting to see different kinds of silos form in replacing that. So these are silos of, accessibility. Do you have access to people? Do you have the time? You've got a sick kid at home right now, you're probably at 20 or 30% of your normal availability and productivity. So what does that mean for you? What does that mean for your team? What does it mean for the work that you're doing? So I think we're trying to figure that stuff out, and that's the macro story right now. But I think individually there might be, you might have a question for me that focuses on a particular type of customer or particular type of organization or industry that I could be more specific about instead of sounding like a wishy-washy design.
No, I think that's really helpful. And I know that it's kind of a broad question, but I think what we're kind of trying to pull out from that. I mean, a lot of our customers are either, large scale enterprises, which, like, as you said, they have multiple divisions of people that may or may not know what the left hand is doing or what the right hand is doing.
Right.
And I think we kind of preach the same thing with this idea of, as much as possible, be bullish about, reducing bottlenecks and reducing silos. And that's really difficult. And even the call that I just got off of, that is one of the biggest challenges. This company has, 60,000 employees. How do you possibly wrap your head around getting buy-in or onboarding, or, this particular product team is doing this thing that maybe 90% of the company may not ever know they existed. And how do you get change to take place and amplify that by, they're all in their bedrooms, right? And it's a different, and by the way, they're not used to that. So that is a structural change. As we've been thinking about this framework for how we think about product teams and the work that we do, we talk about disciplines, postures, and structures. And postures are about your mindset, the way that you approach things, being coachable, having a learning mindset. Your disciplines, of course, the things that you do, the rhythms you create, the ceremonies you have, et cetera. And then structures are about those things that kind of define the direction you're going, the way that you work, the guide rails, right? And the hard thing is that structures, I use the analogy that if you have a bone in your body, it makes up the structure of your body. But if that bone breaks, it hurts. Now the bone will heal back stronger, but while it's broken, you are incapacitated. It is an uncomfortable situation to be in. And I think we just went through a breaking of a structural bone, because now we have to have a new defined way of working. So we're seeing changes like that happen.
Yeah, those structures it's asking the question, what's true about your world right now? Like, what's steady? What's the constraint? What's true? What's the field of play you have to operate in? And then you have the other statement or cliche of like, my world was just rocked. It's like, it's the same thing. It's like, what was true about my world is no longer true. And so new constraints, new structures have to be created, have to be found in order to progress in a somewhat productive way.
Yeah, and you see how this all connects back to biology, right? So this is all behavior. And depending on whose particular point of view you have on behavioral change, like BJ Fogg's a really good example. He's created the BJ Fogg model, where you've got a habit forming matrix, essentially, like what needs to change for you to adopt a new set of behaviors. And it's so simple that you show it to anybody and they go like, it can't be this simple. Like, it's impossible that behavior Yet it is that simple, and it's also that difficult. So anytime you say to somebody, look, all I need to do to change this behavior is to break this one bone, and they're like, well, I'm not going to break that bone. It's the changing that's the hard. It's not the change. The outcome is fine. It's the part between that. And so when you think about the 3 things that you can influence, they very rarely happen at the same time. So you can pick and choose those. And then you get a situation like COVID, where all those things happen at the same time. So the three things are environmental change, can happen very suddenly or very slowly. There is event change. So this could be like a heart attack, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in some cases, it's bad change or good change, very
Right.
sudden.
Right.
And then the other one is habits. So what's the routine in your case? What's the discipline? What's the ritual or routine that you've adopted? And so very rarely do those three things happen at the same time. But then suddenly you've got a pandemic, you've got environmental change. It's happened very, very fast to the point where it's literally changing lives.
Right.
And then you've got new habits. So now we're all working from home. We're doing different things than we were a week or two or a month ago. And now all those three things are happening over a long period of time. So there's this stasis period where nothing is like it's changed, but then nothing's changed. So that phone is healing again.
Right.
If you think about the importance of leadership and teams, it's a constant cycle of that. Like, what are the environmental things? And those could be anything from incentives to structure. So like structure around an organization, the incentives are really important. If you like going super deep and geeking out and stuff, there's a book called Loon Shots, Loon.
I haven't read that, no.
Safi Bakal. So he's a physicist who's looked at essentially trying to create a theory of everything around innovation. So what's the E equals MC squared equivalent for innovation?
Okay.
And really it's about those things at work, right? Those three changes. What are the incentives? What are the skill sets that you need in order to make those things work or not? And are those things related to the work that needs to be done? So you might hire somebody for a skill set, but if it's not relevant, given this new environment we're in, then where are we? What are we going to do?
Right.
See you later.
Yeah, we just found that recently where we had to make some changes to our organization because some roles were just not relevant anymore. It's not the person's fault. They didn't fail. They weren't doing a bad job. We're just like, we don't do events anymore.
Right.
You're going to do like,
right.
that kind of marketing anymore. So what are we going to do about that? So I think understanding those components, understanding behavior, understanding the biology and the psychology behind that makes you a much more sensitive leader because you start thinking about what needs to happen every day, all the time, regardless of which team you're in or which company you're working at. All of those things are relevant all the time. If you understand behavioral models, doesn't matter where you work, you're going to find it useful. So first principles, understanding that stuff, being a biologist, being a psychologist, it's going to make you a really good leader and team member, leader. And that's going to help you wherever you go. So if your job gets, made redundant today and you're no longer relevant, that's because you misunderstood how to change. You misunderstood how to change others, how to change with your team, not because, I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. Like you can change, you can mold if you understand those basic principles, or you can make yourself more relevant, I should say.
We talk about it, and it's not always true. And maybe this word gets overused a bit. It's this idea of being adaptive, right? I mean, if you can adapt to a new environment, adapting in an event, or change your habits to even think more adaptively, creating a habit of accepting that change is part of your habitual process. We've been really trying to coach our team, and actually part of our language we're putting out is that you have to expect and assume it is going to change. Whatever it is going to change. I mean, software, right? We build tech, we build applications for enterprises, and that software will change over time, and the way people interact with it will change over time, and the people working on it will change over time, and the people using it will change over time. And being able to keep up with that change is how you not only survive, but that's how you thrive. It's how you actually become someone that is able to look back and go, I said yes for a year worth of risks. It's someone that is able to say, we started a company when we had no business doing such a thing. And I think that's such a great mindset to have. And I think one of the things that we look for when we're hiring a team is, are you adaptable? Can you expect that tomorrow you're going to work on a cybersecurity client and the next day you're going to work on a plant app? okay, well, those are two distinctly different things,
We
right?
used to joke that if you wanted to work in a product design agency or product creation agency, you were also signing up to be the most interesting person at any cocktail party, because
Yes.
you can talk on any topic. Like
Yes.
somebody will say, "Oh, I'm in cybersecurity." You're like, "Great, I got you." Like I can talk for
That's right.
20
That's
minutes
right.
about cybersecurity. Oh,
How do
no,
you
I'm
handle your
healthcare.
NIST
Oh, which part
situation?
of healthcare are you in? You're like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you can go deep. So, that adaptability is, again, another biological principle. Like the
Yeah.
things that survive environmental change are the ones that are most adaptable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. So I'm kind of curious. Maybe I want to watch my time here, but one of the things that I'm interested in, when you think back to either your company or maybe the role that you're in now, if you're trying to work with teams that are growing and changing and adapting, either the product team as a whole or the individuals and the skills in those teams, what are some ways that you think about, I hate overusing the word measure, but how do you think about the growth of those individuals, of that team? How do you know if your team is progressing forward more than saying, well, principally you ought to work like this, and if you are, check, you're good. I mean, that's something we're always questioning, is how do we measure the growth?
Yeah.
How
How
do
do
we
we
give someone,
assess? Yeah.
how do we assess that a person is becoming more adaptable or is getting better in their skill? I'm kind of curious how
Yeah.
you've done that or how you've seen that done.
So I think we've already answered this question in a way. You're looking for people who are willing to adapt and change.
Yeah.
So it's not, are you adaptable, but what have you adapted to? What were the circumstances of that? So when you're interviewing, it's actually interesting to have these conversations. Tell me about the last organization you worked with and a project you worked on that didn't go well, or you had a relationship that didn't work, and what did you do about that?
Right. Of course.
And that can be applied to the folks that work with you right now. Hey, given the circumstances that we've just experienced over the last quarter, how did people show up? Did they show up saying, I'm not going to change, I'm not going to do anything, you've got to change for me, you've got to kind of adapt to my circumstances? Or were they able to say, okay, this is the new normal and we're going to have to make some adjustments, and everybody's going to do that together. We're going to work together and find a way to do that. So, and I'll give you a good example. So when people started working from home very suddenly in early March, my team wrote an entire book called Remote Working for Teams in 2 weeks and published it.
I love it. I love it.
So, showing up on the day, being relevant to the particular environmental situation, saying, this is what people need right now. This is what our customers need. This is what we need. We need that discipline, that guide right now. And I'm sure everybody else does, and get it out there. And then take a step back and say, okay, well, what's the next thing, right? We may not need to talk about remote working forever, because there's a point at which people learn those new skills and then they want to talk about the next thing. And then for us, it was, gee, a lot of this has to do with tooling. Like, we just not set up to work remote like we were, because Envision's a remote company, but
yeah, of course,
most of our customers were like, well, what do we do? Like, how do we work? So we were able to say, well, have you looked at these options and these tools or these experiences, and start thinking about how to convert what they were doing to new things. So getting back to your original question, which is how willing were those people to see those new things, adapt to them, and then apply themselves to them? And do they have a way to show you what they were able to adapt to and create in order for that adaptation to be visible to the world? Because we're not just talking about having a good attitude, right? We're obviously part of it, but it's not the only thing. We can actually see what you were able to do with this new understanding of the world, this new perception of where you are in that context, and what you did about it. So for us, we threw out most of the OKRs that we had set for the quarter, and we looked at what we were able to adjust to, because those OKRs were irrelevant. Like
right.
Yeah. It's not going to be the same anymore.
Like, you didn't achieve your goals this year. Well, it was 2020. Like, nobody achieved the goals.
All rules are out. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Rather, like, well, what did you do in response?
Yeah.
So if we throw everything out, what were you able to do with the vacuum that was created by that? Did you just sit back and complain, Or did you step up and say, you know what everybody needs right now is this thing or these outcomes that we can create together and go and do that. So I think, you know, the problem with having a universal measure for everybody is that it's really not applicable.
Right.
Everybody's doing different things. So what you want to do is have principles. We spoke about this the other day when we were on the call.
I know. I went back to my team and like, guys, principles is you just what, you know, like, I mean, it's already ingrained in who we are, but it's important.
Right. So maybe we threw out OKRs, maybe we threw out our goals, maybe we decided not to do the things we were going to do, but were we aligned with our principles?
Yeah.
If say one of those principles is humble confidence, where did that show up?
Right.
So I have hired and fired people on principles alone.
Mm-hmm.
You can show up and you show the principles, and I know that I can teach you the skills because that language or that tool or whatever can be taught. I mean, go to YouTube, learn a tool. Like, it's just not that hard.
Right.
Like 12-year-olds doing. But can I teach you character? Can I teach you coachability and learning? Probably not. Maybe, but honestly, I don't really want to be in the education business. I'd rather be in the hiring people who've already got there and then layer on top of that specifics. So, and again, and same thing with firing, like you can let somebody go because they didn't align with principles. And that's super easy if you think about it, because both of them then agree. Like the person who's doing the firing and the person who's getting fired are like, yeah, I didn't show up as that. Like you said you wanted this and we agreed on that. And that was a principle of the company. And that's the environment we create. And we didn't do it. So it's an easy exit.
I think we've only had one circumstance. We haven't had to, we've been blessed in that I think we've tried to hire people intentionally for that, right? So that you're taking in the right people. So we haven't had to let too many people go. And there are people we probably should have let go way sooner than we did. But I remember having that exact same conversation with someone who we were trying to say, hey, we're willing to kind of work with you on this particular skill that you can grow in. But to be fair, 5 different clients have asked for you to be taken off their projects. And so that's kind of hard to figure out how I'm going to, and the person came back basically, you don't have a right to tell me that I need to improve. And it was like, oh, well, sweet. It's nice. It's been nice working with you. Like that made it very easy.
I'm not looking
right?
to be coached. Oh,
right.
Okay. Well,
and if you've got principles like coachability or learning or adaptability is core to the company, then you're not saying I don't like you,
right,
or my opinion is different from your opinion. You're saying this organization is built around these pillars.
That's it.
And you're not showing up to support that pillar. So it's an easy conversation then. It's not you against that person.
Richard, as you talk about principles, do those typically align with organizational values? Is that what you mean when you talk about principles, or are they also principles that can be specific to a team? Like if you have your own squad of 5, 6, 7 people, these are the principles that we operate by. How do they ladder up to values? Are they the same?
Yeah. So there's this idea of decision stacking, which I really like. And the decision stack is your company vision. Maybe it's a mission. So I wouldn't say they're interchangeable, but some companies prefer a mission and some of them prefer a vision. So you got your vision, you got your values, and then you may have principles for each team that are different. So for instance, if you're Tesla, for example, you make a lot of different products. So your universal vision for Tesla, the brand, is we're going to accelerate sustainable energy. Something like, right?
Yeah.
But then what are your principles around making cars versus photovoltaic cells versus batteries versus flamethrowers, right? Like those principles are not going to be the same for each team, because those team principles are both very, very contextual, and they need to be actionable. So you need to point at them and say, it was really important that we showed up like this and behaved like this to your posture and which is the first thing, structure,
postures, disciplines, and structures.
So you need to show up with these things, and they needed to align with these principles, and we need to be able to see them in action.
Right.
The values, you see them in action sometimes, but sometimes you don't see them in action. You just see them in attitude. You see them in the way that people present in terms of humility. Like humility isn't an action; it's
Right.
more subtle than that.
Mhm.
So you want to have principles that are very relevant. And what I like to see is team-based principles. In other words, the team has authored the principles. So in your company, it's probably not necessary because it's small enough that you don't have like lots and lots of different teams doing different things.
Right.
They're all essentially doing the same stuff. But at an organization, an enterprise, we've got lots of individuals doing lots of different things, working on multiple products. Then you want some specificity around how those principles are formed around that context and how they're authored. Because if they're just coming down from the top, maybe they won't be absorbed by the team in the same way that if they authored them and owned them. And in a small company, you guys, for example, like you author those things because it's small enough. Right. And then the teams can come back and say, hey, we tried this out and it's not working exactly how we expected. Can we tweak that or change that? That's definitely a scenario for you. Mm-hmm. But in a bigger organization, they may have vision and values as a proxy for principles until the team can author them themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's really helpful. And I'm watching our time. We don't have time to nerd out more, and I would love to, because literally just jumping off the call I was on is a sales call. And I think one of the reasons we realized we might align potentially with this client is around the fact that they have defined a lot of what those principles are, even on their side, on their team. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they do align in many ways with our culture, our ways of seeing product development, cross-discipline teams, small teams, and even inside of a very large organization. That's really exciting. I want to wrap up here. What is maybe something that you're excited about? Maybe something that you're working on right now, something that's having a vision, or something you're personally side project. What's something you're excited about that's going on right now? Or maybe generally speaking, where can people find you to learn more about you?
So the thing I'm most excited about right now is standing up a digital services group at Envision. So think about how we as an organization care about what we call the maturity journey of our customers. So we see them moving towards high maturity when they're doing things like working cross-functionally or collaborating across different parts of the organization, or adopting design strategies, anything that relates to ultimately working better with others. Right. And so what I've tried to do is think about that from a scalable point of view and say, how can everybody get that? How can everybody learn how to be a relevant piece of that maturity journey and go from, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, to, hey, I'm a learning organization now, and we're in this kind of cycle of things getting better and better. And that pathway, I think we can teach. I think we can. And so I essentially create a digital space where you can go and learn these things, and influence a lot of people in that way, in a positive way, like create a lot more design thinkers, or strategic thinkers, or people with a product mindset or a problem mindset. I think our world would be a better place. I honestly think that system across everything right now, and you just walk out in the street and have a look at this.
Right.
All of our systems are broken, and we need to design new systems, because we ultimately rise to the level of our systems. And right now we've risen to the level of that system, especially in our kind of socioeconomic landscape right now.
Right.
And that designers need to show up and make that change, right? Designers need to create that new system. Whether you're an engineer or a designer or a product person or a politician or an activist, you're designing that change in some form so that ultimately that resonates with the new values that we think are important in our world. So I'm going to try and influence that in my small way, and that's what I'm excited about. So,
I think that's a thing. That's a really that is worth being excited about. I love that, and I love seeing, honestly, the growth that Envision has experienced. We were super early adopters of Envision. I remember thinking back to, I reached out to them when they came out with their beta, I think 2011, 2012-ish timeframe. And I said, Clark, hey, this is who I am. And he was actually still responding to emails personally. And then I remember my photo was on the site for like 6 months. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. They put me on there. I mean, we'll see if it goes anywhere. And like now to see where Envision's gone is really cool. So I know it must be a really neat thing to be a part of that team as it's growing and doing great work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I think this has been really, really helpful, and it aligns with so much of the things that we're thinking about right now. And I think you're right. This way of thinking is an opportunity in many ways to not just help build great products, which is awesome, but also maybe potentially change the world, which is really amazing. So thank you.
Well, thank you both.
My name is Mary Carnes, and I'm a digital product designer at Crema, which means I design the interface and user experience for the different products we build as a team. For each product I'm designing, I work with a team of around 3 to 7 individuals, usually a product manager, a developer or 2 or 3, a test engineer, and sometimes a product strategist. I love working at Crema because the culture is so supportive. Not only do my peers and leaders want me to become a better designer, but they also care about my growth as an individual. I honestly get to work alongside some of the best people I know. Option 5 is a podcast by Crema, a digital product agency that creates web and mobile apps for disruptive companies and industry leaders. We believe that design, technology, and culture can help create a world where individuals and companies thrive. Learn more at crema.us.